Hello and welcome to this video that's all about assembling your knitted animal. In this video, I'm assembling the pieces for a leopard, but this process works no matter which animal pattern you're putting together. So at this point in the process, you need to have knitted all of the pieces of your animal. That means you should have a body, arms and legs, tail, and the head, including anything that goes with the head, like the ears, or the muzzle if you're doing a chimpanzee and monkey, or horns if you're doing something like the cow. You'll also need stuffing, an old sock. The sock is optional, but I think it's a great way to give your animal more strength to help it sit up better because it gives it kind of a strong core. You'll also need a yarn or tapestry needle, some scissors, and about a yard of dark colored yarn for adding the eyes and nose. And just a reminder, if you prefer to work from a written pattern, you can find links to the shops where I sell those by looking in the description area as well. And finally, just a quick reminder, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. That will help you see all the new videos that I upload. And leave any questions and comments in the comment section. And once you've finished putting your whole project together, please share a photo of it on my Facebook page. And you can also find a link to that in the description area of this video. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the body. So take the body section, the body piece that you've knitted, and spread it out with the wrong side or the purl side up, and place a layer of stuffing on top of that. Be careful not to get too much stuffing at this point. We just want a little layer. You can always add more later. Then you're going to take the sock and figure out just how tall or wide you need it to be to match the body. I like to fold over one end of it, and then I roll it up into a tight tube. Take that tube, place it on top of the layer of stuffing, and then roll the whole thing up together like a burrito or a taco. Next, we're going to take the yarn that's left over at the cast-on end and thread that onto a tapestry needle. And then we're going to use mattress stitch to sew up this back seam. Because this video is so long, I'm not going to go into much detail about how to actually do mattress stitch, but I do want to share a quick little hint here. Normally for mattress stitch, you stick your needle in through the middle of one V and back out the V right above it, and that works just fine, but I've found that I can actually skip a V on each stitch. So I go down into one V, skip the V just above it, and then come back up through the following V. And by skipping a V on each stitch, it means that my seam gets done twice as fast, and I've never yet found a situation where I could tell any difference in my seams. Once you get to the end, I like to tie a single knot just to secure the yarn a little, and you don't need to worry about this because it ends up getting covered up as you work. Once I have the back seam sewn, I like to take a look at it, and I like there to be a little stomach that pokes out. So I'll add a little bit more stuffing, and there you also might find that there are some places where the stuffing's not completely perfect, and I like to just kind of play with it a little bit and add more stuffing where it's needed, and especially add some extra stuffing where the stomach is. I also like to stuff in any remaining yarn ends that I have. It just works the same as stuffing. And I also like to use any leftover yarn clippings that I have. It makes great stuffing as well. Okay, so we have our body. Now the next step is to add the arms. Now if you're following the patterns, you should have already sewn up the side seams of the arms and the legs, so that should already be done. So the first thing you have to do is put a little bit of stuffing just into the very tips of the hands and the feet. So just that little round bulb, I just like to stuff it. I feel like if I stuff the entire arm or the entire leg, it kind of makes them stick out in funny ways. So I like them to hang a little bit and be a little bit more floppy. And again, you can use yarn clippings as stuffing if you want. In this example, I just used the basic round legs for all 4 of my legs, but if you've knitted the long legs that can have socks, that's perfectly fine. It's the same process for attaching the legs, whether they're the long legs or these basic round legs that you see in this video. So to attach the arms, you're again going to start with the yarn end, thread it onto a tapestry needle. And I like to weave my needle through each stitch on the cast on edge until I get back around to the front. Then I like to pull that yarn so it makes a little round shoulder shape. Once that's done, then I find the back seam of the body and then position the arm about halfway between the back and the stomach. Once I found that position, then I come down about 4 stitches from the neck and begin sewing through the shoulder that was just created and the corresponding stitches on the body. So I go through a stitch or 2 or 3 on the shoulder, and then I go through a stitch or 2 or 3 on the body. And I just keep going around and around until I come all the way back to the beginning again. And then repeat these steps with the second arm. Just make sure to position the second arm directly across from the first. You'll also want to keep track of where that back seam is. That'll help you make sure that you're sewing everything on straight. At this point, we're ready to sew the bottom legs onto the cast on edge of the body. So start by locating that back seam again and lay the body down with that seam facing you, facing up. And position the first back leg to either the left or the right side with its back seam also facing up. So you've got both of the back seams, both the back seam of the body and the back seam of the leg facing up and facing you. Then you're going to, again, attach the yarn that's left over from the cast on edge, attach that to a tapestry needle. Find the place on the body's cast on edge that corresponds with the leg cast on edge, and then just go through 1 stitch of the leg and 1 stitch of the body. And pull that through and keep going all the way around just like that. The next stitch of the body, the next stitch of the leg, and just keep going around until you get somewhere near the middle of the stomach on the front side of the animal. I don't like to sew this entire leg on. For one thing, I want to leave a little bit of an opening here where I can work to attach the tail. And for another thing, I like to be able to make sure I've got these legs positioned correctly. And this is especially important if you're sewing on legs that will later have shoes on them or that have the long feet, because it's easy to get those off just a little bit. So I don't want to sew the legs on completely because I want to be able to make some corrections if I need to. And at this point you can see my yarn broke, but here's the awesome thing about these patterns. It's okay because you can just tuck that end in. You can even tie a knot if you need to, and then take one of the other yarn ends that are all hanging out here to continue sewing the edges with. At this point I like to stop and start sewing the second leg on, just so I can tell if those legs are positioned correctly and if they look good together. And again, this isn't as important when you're sewing on the basic round legs, but it's a lot more important when you're sewing on those long legs. Once you get both legs mostly sewn on, check that you like the way the legs are positioned, and you may have to pull out some stitches if you've got one leg sewn too far over to one side. But when you like where they are, then finish sewing around to the area between the legs and sew that seam just partially. I like to leave just a little small opening so I can stuff in my yarn ends and also finish working with the tail. And at this point, let's attach the tail. So again, you're going to find the position on the back between the arms and legs. Ideally, this will be along the back seam, but it's very possible that with all the sewing and stuffing, things have gotten off slightly. And that's not a problem when you use mattress stitch to sew up the back seam because you can't see the seam very well. You can feel it, but you can't see it. So it's okay if it gets off, but at this point you just want to make sure the tail is positioned evenly between the legs and the arms and on the back. To help me find the position where the tail looks best, sometimes I have to experiment a little bit, but I usually like putting it right in the center of the back, somewhere around the thickest part of the body, before the rows where you begin doing the decreases. And as with the arms, thread the yarn tail onto a tapestry needle and then begin sewing through one stitch on the tail edge and one corresponding stitch on the body. And do this all the way around until you get back to where you started. Then thread the yarn back through the back of the animal and add these ends again as more stuffing into the back of the animal. Once the tail is attached, you can stuff in all but one remaining yarn tail into the body with all the other stuffing, and then with that one remaining tail, you can sew up the bottom seam so it's completely closed. I like to squeeze the front and back seams together and then just stitch across from the front to the back until the hole is completely closed. And at this point, I'll also check that everything's good with the legs and make any small adjustments there. and then I hide that final yarn end inside the body. And now we can add the head. Once all of the facial details have been added, then you can stuff all the extra yarn ends into the center of the head as additional stuffing. And just be careful to separate the yarn from the seams so that you can use that yarn to close the seam up. And just a quick note here, when I have an animal like the leopard that needs additional facial details like whiskers and spots, I'll usually add those before closing up the seam at the bottom of the head. In this video, I'm not going to take the time to do that, but keep in mind that if you've got additional details, do that first before you close up this bottom seam. Okay, now we're at the last step. All we have to do now is attach the head and then you're done. So as with everything else, I like to start by positioning the head and seeing if it looks right. I like to attach the head with one stitch at the front, then I like to take a different yarn tail and stitch a stitch at the back. Then I stuff all the other yarn ends into the neck. And I like to work a few more stitches into the front of the head and a few more stitches at the back. Throughout the process, I like to stop now and again and take a look at how the head is positioned. It's really easy to get a lopsided head if I don't do that. And as with the arms and the tail and the ears, I attach by sewing through one stitch on the head and then one stitch on the neck or the body. As you're going, be careful not to make the stitches too far to the inside of the head. If you do that, your head will end up being really floppy. So once you've got the head the way you want it, sew a couple final stitches to anchor the yarn, and then hide that end inside the center of the body, and you're done. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to like it and subscribe to my channel so you can get notified when I release new animal and clothing patterns. And share a photo of your completed project on my Facebook page. See you next time!